So I'm going to record the webinar from this moment onwards. And today's webinar will focus on the Viva. We will have a run through what can be expected within the Viva, what it is about, what types of questions might be asked, and how to prepare for it. But at the very beginning, I think one should ask oneself the honest question, how good is my thesis? And where am I? Now, ideally, the third would be the case that you have submitted a pretty decent thesis and you're just very nervous about the Viva and prepare for it and then go through it. However, more often than not, unfortunately, we come across the first two cases. And the first case, not so good and just gambling for luck, that can be a deliberate choice, or it might be a result of ignorance from not understanding what the thesis is about anyway. This often is happening once the problem has not been really worked out and once the thesis is mainly gambling for solutions. So if you went wrong on the basics, then obviously there's not much that could be recovered. Now, if it was a deliberate choice, you understood the thesis is not as good as it should be, but you don't have any further motivation, then that's equally fine. The second case is, I think, what we are seeing most often, that you're simply running out of time, so you are forced and have to submit. Now, at this point in time, it's a sensible option to submit a full thesis that is perhaps not as good as you would like it to be, than running out of time and thereby not graduating. So this is a sort of deliberate choice, but for a different motivation, the motivation being running out of time. So in between 1, 2, and 3, the ideal to aim for is 3. What we understand is happening very often is number 2, and what should be avoided is to go down for number 1. So this is just a bit of an outline on where you might be. Now, what is the Viva anyway? The Viva is an oral examination that comes at the end and is probing you on your written thesis. Not all countries have a Viva. In the UK, it's quite common though. And usually the Viva consists of 2 examiners, an internal one and an external one. The internal one is nominated by your university usually once you submit your thesis, while the second first needs to be sourced, and sometimes students are also given the option to point into external examiners that might be suitable, for example, those ones from which you have used a lot of literature and that therefore should be in a good position to judge and probe your work. The purpose of the Viva, and in particular if you've done your thesis and study remotely, is to confirm that the thesis is your own work, that it was not written by someone else, that there was no ghostwriting involved, and that you have understood what you have been doing and that you are able to discuss and defend it. So this is very simple, the purpose, and well to understand. And there might be 3 different outcomes. No. There might be a number of different outcomes, and all of them are quite straightforward. The degree to be awarded, so it's an immediate pass, which very, very, very rarely is happening. Another option is the degree to be awarded subject to minor modifications, which is followed by be awarded subject to major modifications. And the difference in between the minor and the major modifications is mainly, again, time. Means if the changes are seen to take too long to be done within a period of usually 3 to 6 months, then you will get major modifications so that you have an appropriate amount of time available to improve the thesis. Now, another option, and which at current was, in the case of the GBA program at the University of Liverpool, I see the students participating in the webinar are mainly from there, was major revision with resubmission. So there was no such thing as major modifications only. This changed recently, and for the good, because not each major modification should be also a resubmission, and not each resubmission should be resulting in another Viva to be done. Notably, where it's only a time question why major modifications have been given. If the substance of the work needs to be changed fundamentally, for example, if you don't have had a problem focus established in the first place, then obviously another Viva makes sense, because you need to defend the work on very different grounds, based against the problems that you afterwards articulated and the literature review that you then carried out. This will be fundamentally different than in the first version of your Viva, of your thesis. So thereby, major modifications might be with or without another Viva. Another two options, which rarely, on other three options, which rarely are happening, is that you are getting a lower degree, or that you are failing. I can't recall many cases of fail. There are some cases that you awarded a lower degree, but again, the reason there is that even at the resubmission, or usually at the resubmission, you didn't manage still to improve the work, that it's up to the standard, and it's usually not up to the standard again, because it has not established a clear research problem, or the engagement with the literature was not strong enough, or the analysis was not deep enough. So some of those reasons might result in failing or being awarded a lower degree. Up to this point, are there any questions? Is everyone still with me?
Okay. No questions. Thank you.
Good. Then we come to strategies on how to prepare for the Viva. Now, if you understand that your work will have roughly 50,000 words, that's quite substantial amount of pages that we are looking at. So you might want to create a 4 to 6 pages roadmap out of that provides a brief overview of the key things that the thesis is covering. And you might work in the good old analog post-it notes way and annotate your thesis through, so that you can have it at hand and quickly look into it once being in the Viva. This is very well accepted and a way forward that should be considered. Another thing that you might be doing is to prepare for it orally. The Viva is an oral examination. There's no slideshow to be given. It's only you talking. So therefore, you might want to prepare presenting your work. And you might also want to experiment with different techniques. And you might want to present it to people that haven't come across your work earlier. Now, if there's an option, then you might want to consider a mock Viva that is involving and engaging with real academics that are usually examiners themselves, and that probe you and walk you through the examination process. This, on the one hand, allows you to get a better idea and understanding the look and feel of the Viva, but on the other hand, it also helps reducing the amount of stress and preparing you to be less nervous once it comes to the real Viva experience. So, what to expect then actually within the Viva? Basically, there are 4 sort of questions that you can expect. What is it about? What did you do? What did you find? And why does it matter? And each of that questions you should be answer within less than 2 minutes. I think the 2 minutes rule is very crucial, and usually it's one of the first things where students get themselves into trouble if they ignore this 2 minutes rule. If you can't explain in that time what your thesis is about, then you usually do not know it yourself. It is a clear sign that the thesis is not focused, that the narrative is not in place. So you better manage to talk about in 2 minutes what it is about. Likewise, what did you do? Understanding that research is presented in a linear way, you should outline in the same way, what did you do? I do understand that research is often carried out in a non-linear way. This is to say that you are collecting data not item by item base, but that it's a front and back, that by times the literature is guiding you and pointing to new questions that are asked. New questions that are asked is guiding you back to the literature, thereby allowing you to get a better understanding. This is a front and back struggle that is in practice taking place. However, once it comes to the examination and the way you present your data and what you have been doing, it should be in a nice and neat, linear, simple way that can be explained within 2 minutes. Likewise, what did you find? Now, a risk at this point in time is that you start just going back, talking about what did you do, rather than what did you find. And the reason being is, what did you find is a thematic question. So you should be able to outline the different problem domains that you were finding and the main themes that you were discovering. Now, if you haven't managed to do that, and if you were writing up your thesis rather in a process way, talking about what you have been doing, then it will be very difficult for you to explain within 2 minutes what did you find. So make sure you are aware about the different themes, about the different problem domains that your work was uncovering. And finally, even if you manage to do all of the three, the question could be, why does that matter? Like, it's obvious that things didn't work. So why did you spend 5 years of researching that? And it will be perhaps very obvious to the examiners because they are experienced researchers. So be prepared to have an answer in place for that. And one of the honest answers could be, yeah, why it perhaps it was obvious in hindsight, but at the point in time you started, that didn't seem to be obvious at all, and for the reasons of A, B, C. So a well-argued question does matter to explain why does it matter. Now, looking into questions that examiners might ask, there are different type of questions, different motivations behind the questions. And we will look into some of those motivations. On the one hand, there will be warm-up questions because it's well known that you will be very, very nervous usually, and it's not uncommon that the Viva is pushing you closely before you break. And this is something you also should be aware about. No one wants to break you, but yes, you will be probed. You very likely will be probed close to the breaking point. And as more experienced the examiner is, as more he will push towards that point, but understands once he's there and will then back up. Another type of question is confirmatory questions that let you demonstrate your knowledge, the knowledge both in depth and in width, so that you know about the field, but you also have a deep knowledge about the problems that you looked at. And you also should know about the boundaries that you established, so what is of relevance and what not, and how the literature relates to the problems that you have been examined. Now, there will also be type of pushing the envelope questions, or this is neat questions. Now, this is neat questions. We also all like to get a heads up, but do understand that a heads up shouldn't result in you finding your work and celebrating it yourself in the Viva, but rather take a heads up critical, acknowledge it with a certain amount of pride, but that's where it stops, and then be please critical again with the follow-up questions. Overconfident students are very, very dangerous, and I think they're even more dangerous to themselves than those ones that go into the Viva with a bit of understandable fear. Are there any questions about the type of questions that examiners ask?
Andrews, could you just clarify that point a little bit further, especially the ones where you said pushing the envelope?
Okay. It is very clear that your knowledge will be limited, and it's very clear that your research was limited. I mean, you can't research everything. So what is important here is that you have a clear idea where the boundaries of your research are, and that you can well argue why you set the boundaries here and not there. For example, you could find something out that's of tremendous importance. It's a real problem, and it's real broke, and you chose to not examine that further, but look at other problems. And the reason being, this very big problem is within the macro environment, and thereby even understanding it wouldn't enable you to solve the problem. So this is a sound argument why you chose to set the boundary at that point. It's within the macro environment. Even if you would understand that problem perfectly well, it wouldn't allow you to change, to initiate change, and thereby.
So when you say it doesn't allow you to change, you are referring to the problem in hand.
Exactly, because you have a clear outcome expectation, which in your case is you want to have actionable knowledge that at the end of the research enables you to tackle the issue. Whether that means you resolve it or you walk away from it because you understand you cannot tackle it is a different question. But what you want is actionable knowledge, and therefore you need to look for knowledge which is within the micro environment, or perhaps even within the meso environment, ideally micro environment, because there you hold full control and you can take deliberate decision on whether or not to act.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much.
Very well. Are there further questions on this? Okay, then we come on how to prepare for the Viva. Now there are the obvious things. Check your institution's policies and practices, and also whether they changed or not. Do not rely on your supervisor, because he is not usually doing and running the Vivas. So he is not needing to check whether policies and practices have changed within the last months. Now, reread your thesis, keep up to date with research, yes, but I mean, it's also clear and well understood that once you hand in your thesis, other research will take place. And it's also understood that your time is limited. So you're a working professional, you can't just continue reading journals. But keep a bit an eye on the development, including the development in your organization, means what has changed and what does that imply to the outcomes of your thesis. Know your examiners. Yes, but you can know him or her and still it doesn't tell you much. So yes, check their background in publications, but also take the examiners at the day by how you understand them. Try to read from their faces, try to engage with them, try to connect with them. I think this is very important. So there are the obvious things and the less obvious things. And talking about that, so what does impress examiners? I talked already about it earlier, that the overconfident student that thinks he knows it all is certainly a turn off for an examiner. Go into the Viva with a good amount of self-critical behavior, combined with a bit of pride of the work you have been doing. And I think then that could work out very well. one of the key things from this slide is showing honesty. I think as soon as you try to cover up, you lost it, because that means your work is not credible any longer. It cannot be trusted whether the data that you presented is really the data that you collected, whether you have perhaps excluded some data or just misinterpreted deliberately data. As soon as honesty is gone, I think one of the pillars of the Viva is out. So be honest and also admit those things that were not going well. Admit what the data is not revealing, because you are not there to prove anything. You are just there to show what you found out, and it's well understood that not all that you found out will provide clear answers and results. So honesty is paramount. Now, submission and preparation. At one point you will be asked to submit, and the thesis is never good enough. Each time you read through it, you will find things you can improve. But at one point, your time is up, and that situation, then you anyway will need to submit. If the time is not up, you need to take the decision yourself. Is it good enough? So once you think so, please submit it and then prepare in a proper way for it. Summarize the chapters, get the main outcomes clear, look at the areas of strength, what worked out well and what not. Have a good idea about the methods that you applied and how you applied them. Again, not everything will have worked out well. It's totally understood. And again, your work is written up in a linear way, but that doesn't mean it was happening linear. What does it mean? Once it comes to the methods, now you will write up the methods that you applied in a linear way. However, once you collected data, you will have learned, and the point in between the first data collection and the last data collection likely will have shown a progression of your ability to collect the data, about the way you looked into the data, about the focus. All of that will have sharpened and improved over the time, and this will not be visible within a linear presentation of the work you have been doing. You might address that, however, at a different point in time, either once you present the data or once you are doing the analysis, or perhaps in the conclusions, or by adding a reflective chapter on the process of having carried out your research. So there are different methods and techniques that could be applied to show how you have been progressing, so to mitigate and navigate in between linear and non-linearity. Is that making sense, the difference in between linearity and not linearity? Okay. Now, once it comes to the Viva day, it's a big day, and you will be very, very nervous. Now, if you rest the day before, that might help. To some, to others, they might need to be rather very tired. So to calm down a bit, I think that's a very personal thing. And be positive, anticipate an interesting discussion, because this is by the end what it is about, an interesting discussion. It's meant to look at your work, to fully understand it, and to confirm initial assumptions or to get them challenged. Challenged usually in the positive way rather than in the negative way. Now, the examiners will have made up their mind whether or not they think that thesis is worth it, the degree, or if it should be resubmitted with minor or major modifications. Now, once you go into the Viva, understand that there's only so much that you at this point in time can do. Now, again, if you would have had a mock Viva initially, then you would have already gotten a heads up on what to expect. And if that heads up would have been, be prepared to go out with major changes, then you might behave in the Viva in accordance to that. And this behavior might, at the end of the Viva, result of you getting out with only minor changes or with major changes, but without any additional Viva, which by the end of the day is a very good and positive outcome. So understand it's a discussion, but there's only so much you can do once in. Now, you will get questions, as said, up to the breaking point, and by times, even beyond. If you have an examiner that is less empathic or less experienced or less sensible, you might be broken, and it's very tricky once you broke down to get up again. And we have seen that in the past, and I think what at that point in time is critical is to admit that you just broke, because it will tell the examiner, that he crossed the line, and he certainly did not want to do that. So he will behave differently if you are that open and frank with him. And by any chance, avoid blaming. You will be questioned, yes, and you might find that very provocative. And it's intentionally provocative, so avoid blame by any chance. As much as not being honest, blaming is a good way to ruin the Viva. There are many ways that don't harm, but there are some things that certainly will ruin the Viva. Blame and dishonesty are two of them. Now, other questions on the Viva day as such? Good. So then let's look a bit into what happens during the Viva. As said, it's a discussion that looks at the strengths and the weaknesses. So be prepared to look into both. The student who is overconfident, who will just tell how great the thesis was and that it solved the problem and all is fine and beautiful, will find it troublesome in the Viva. Those ones that understand that yes, some things work out well and some things less, will be in a much better position to discuss what their work has been finding out. So be prepared, write up things that worked out well and that didn't work out well, and keep the focus on the problem and not on the outcome. There's a clear difference in between the outcome expectations that one has, which is part of chapter 6, the conclusion, which are means forward to resolve or tackle the issues that had been examined. Now, the focus of the Viva, however, is on chapter 1 till 5, first and foremost, which is to look into the problem and discuss how it has been researched, which methods have been used for that, and what literature has been engaged with. Is that difference clear and understood in between outcome expectations and what has been done? Okay. Now, if you don't understand a question, then ask for clarification. Don't just go off and just talk. And take time to think before answering. While obvious, often it is not. As noted earlier, there's a 2 minutes rule. And at the beginning of the Viva, the first question will be to quickly, briefly outline what you have been doing, which often is followed by students talking 5 to 10 minutes about what they have been doing. And this will not work out in your favor. So think before answering, provide short answers that stick to the point, and ask questions at the end of your answer to understand if the other was understanding what came out of your mouth and whether it is clear and was answering what was asked. And if you don't know an answer, then that's fair enough. As much as you need to establish boundaries, it's also clear that you can't have answers to everything. So that should be admitted at that point in time. Likewise, you are not expected to know your thesis by heart, so you can pause and look into the thesis, to provide more specific information in the answer. This is very well understood. And if you get lost, resume. Now, certainly the examiners won't get you out of the trouble that you yourself talk yourself into, but if you see you got lost, stop it there and resume. Address it openly and start fresh over again. I think this is a very viable thing to do. Now, as we come to the end of the webinar, let's look into some Viva essentials. The 2 minutes rule is paramount. No answer longer than that. Likewise, one answer, one sentence, one argument, pause. Less is more. Talk less, but more focused. This should be combined with double feedback loops. Close each response with an inquiry, whatever that inquiry is. Make sure you answered the question. Make sure it was understood what came out of your mouth. Make sure the communication chain is maintained and does not get broke. If you do that, you have nothing to fear, I would argue. And do not opinionate. Now, having said that, those students that opinionate in the Viva already will have opinionated in the thesis, thereby the damage has been done. Having said that, it's not too late to change. If you see you're opinionated in your thesis, address it openly in the Viva, and again, that can be a game changer. And get yourself out of the mud and resume if you understand you went off the road, and likely you will go off the road once, twice, 3 times during the Viva. That is also very normal. Are there any questions on those simple tips?
Yes, I'm Roy.
Hello, Roy.
Hi, I just had one question about this. Should I direct the progress, or should I, have some discussion points and in advance, or I just give it to the examiner? Is that it?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay. That's a very good question. Now, and it's a tricky question to answer. I think both you should be doing in the preparation. Having said that, the discussion will be led by the examiners. You will not be asked to bring up your own discussion points. So having prepared for those discussion points that you think might come up will put you in a better position, but you will not be expected to lead the discussion. And if you're expected to lead the discussion, then only within a very tight boundary. And if you stick to the 2 minutes rule, and if you use the one answer, one sentence, one argument technique, and establish double feedback loops, then you give back the ball to the examiner after he was throwing it to you. So this will allow the conversation to be guided by the examiners rather than by you. Because as more you talk, as more you can talk yourself into trouble, rather than as more you can impress the others. I think this is something to be understood. The question.
The little said, the better.
Sorry, once again?
I said the little said, the better.
Yes, yes. You're not there to impress. You're there for clarification. Yeah. I mean, those two that interview you, they read their thesis, they made up their mind, and they now just want to get confirmation, and that's it. So therefore, if they ask questions, answer that questions. Be up to the point, as precise as possible. Use your thesis and reference into it. Apply the same professional way as you have applied in your thesis. Having said that, if you have not applied the professional way in your thesis, and you understood it in between submission and the Viva, also be frank and open on that, and say, this is the reason why you can't reference into a particular session because of.
Okay.
But then again, as more you say, as more it rather counts against you than for you. Stick to answer the questions that are put forward to you.
Oh, okay.
Don't be inventive. Don't try to celebrate yourself. Don't try to sell. All of that will work counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, please, can I add something to
Yes,
Roy's
please.
question? Roy's question was a very, very interesting question, just like Andrea said. You know, in other words, can you, the candidate, lead the Viva? And that is a very, very interesting point you are making. And just like Andreas is saying, you cannot lead the Viva. The Viva questioning is determined by the two examiners. However, you can influence it very, very much because you are the owner of the thesis. You know your strong part of the thesis. The examiners have read your thesis. They know the weak part of it. When it comes to the situation where you are being led in questions about the strong part, you try and show your competency and knowledge there very, very well. So in that case, you will see that the examiners will be leading you on based upon your responses on your strong parts, because they want to, sometimes examiners also want to know more about the area you have researched. They are very interested, genuinely. So that is where you advance your strong points. And just like on the other side of it, they know your weaknesses there. And when they started pounding you on that, don't take the bait and allow them to pound you, but just admit that, not admit, but just have a discussion that, oh, that is a very interesting way of looking at it, the way they have said. And that is how you could improve upon that. But in as much as possible, when it comes to your strong part, make sure you can demonstrate your competencies. When it comes to your weak part of the thesis, don't, just like the slides, one of the slides was showing, don't get into an argument or confrontation with them. Concede in a very constructive way that it can be looked at in this other way. Thank you.
I think it's exactly that. Understand that the likely outcome of the Viva, 99%, is you will get modifications, be it minor or major. Therefore, if there are weak points that you can't answer, admit it, and then you will be given the chance to improve it later. So it's a perfect, well understood thing. And as Nee said, there are a number of things that will be asked, and as we now will see on a chapter by chapter base, I'm not going to read through all of those questions. You can do that afterwards if you wish to. There is quite a catalog of questions that the examiners will need to go through. Some of that they might be feeling comfortable based upon the thesis that they were reading already, and some of that they will have flagged up to follow. And so it goes on and on and on. It's quite a good list that need to be worked through. So if you're lengthy, if you don't stick to the 2 minutes rule, if you don't keep it on one argument, this can take for days, and there are no days time. Therefore, less is more. Now, as said, there are a few options, and the most likely options that you will face after having went through the Viva are minor modifications or major modifications, either with resubmission or without resubmission. Be prepared for that, and that is a reason to celebrate actually quite well. You should take it objectively. You're not there to be failed or judged. You're there to be probed and to discuss your written work. Don't blame others. for things you have been doing over a time frame of 7 years. It's not that things go wrong in the Viva. And once you're given the chance to improve your work, improve it strategically and handle it strategically. Now, if you are given a time frame to resubmit, make a good use of that time frame and don't try to resubmit too early. Like everything in life, if you're given a deadline, other people judge why this is a date and not another. So if you're given 6 months and you resubmit in 1 month, then even if you spend that month day and night working on your thesis, that won't look good. So understand that, please, too. Also, get engaged with your supervisor, so to understand that you understand the feedback that you have been receiving. You will get feedback in written afterwards, and it will once again be presented in a linear way. Now, this can be a false friend, because linear feedback does not mean that you can address it in a linear way. And in particular, once it comes to major modifications. If, for example, you would read in chapter 4, data and finding, that it was not focused, that no problem was identified, that means actually you cannot address that only in chapter 4, but it will require you to rewrite and restructure your entire thesis profoundly, because you will need to establish a problem focus. And this is one of the most cases that we've been seeing happening, that exactly the thesis was not establishing a focus in the first place, and thereby this must be done afterwards. So understand that while presented linear, the feedback is not always addressable in a linear way. Your supervisor will be in the position to explain you and help you through understanding what is linear and what is not linear addressable. Is that differentiation in between linear and not linear making sense to everyone?
Please, can you explain it again, please?
Okay. Now, as much as you don't do the research in a linear way, the feedback is not linear. Now, you present your work in a neat and nicely linear way, whereby chapter 1 is the introduction, chapter 2 might be the literature review, chapter 3 the methods, chapter 4 the finding, chapter 5 the analysis, and chapter 6 the conclusion. Now, this is a nice and neat linear way. But you will not have written it in this way. You will have written it up gradually. Once data and findings emerge, you will go back to the literature, you will find new literature will result in different ways of analyzing the data, Chapter 5 will result of going back, collecting more data. Chapter 4 will result of going back to chapter 2, reshaping the way you present the literature. The narrative and focus will only become clear over time. Thereby, you will establish key terms over time, which will need to be built into your thesis, so to allow for a consistent reading. So you see, it's a very non-linear process on how you build up your thesis. Likewise, the feedbacks that you will receive might be structured on a chapter-by-chapter base, but if you read in chapter 4 that there was no problem focus in place, that means you need to bring it in through all of the chapters. If it's not in place in chapter 4, it's very unlikely it is in place in chapter 2. I haven't come across a thesis where that would have been the case. So understand why points are perhaps only mentioned in chapter 4 or chapter 5. They have fast implications and mean you would need to address all of the chapters, or would need to address that point in all of the chapters. Is that making sense?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Very well. Okay, with this, I think we are done.